Thank you very much, Honourable Speaker. Sir, the Right to Information Act of 2005 is one of the most monumental accomplishments of our country's democratic governance in recent years. A law that allows an ordinary citizen with no official power or authority to elicit information from the powers that be in our country is an absolutely extraordinary development in the practice of our democracy. RTI has created mechanisms and platforms for the practice of continued vigilance of our government by, obviously, our ordinary people, our ordinary citizens, a remarkable attribute now of our democratic citizenship. When I was at the UN, Mr. Speaker, I was privileged to chair an international seminar on right to information systems around the world. Though I was not yet back in India and not a part of our politics, it made me immensely proud to realize that how globally celebrated is our RTI legislation, which was held up by activists around the world as a model RTI law. At that conference, I met some of the prime movers of RTI from India's civil society, people like Aruna Roy, Nikhil Dey, my old teacher Shekhar Singh of the National Campaign for People's Right to Information, which worked closely with the chairperson of the UPA, Srimati Sonia Gandhi, who is here today. They had clearly understood that the key to the success of the RTI would be an institutional and legal mechanism which would not only be independent, with a clear and secure mandate, but also function transparently and be empowered to override the traditional governmental habits and structures of secrecy and exclusive control with which we are all so familiar. The purpose of RTI, Mr. Speaker, is to make us uncomfortable. When we were in government and now when the then opposition party is now in government, RTI is inevitably an instrument for keeping a check on the overweening power of the authorities. That is why RTI gives us an independent information commission as the highest authority on government information, headed by people with fixed tenures in office and fixed salaries at the level of Supreme Court judges, along with the powers to penalize errant officials. Now, through the Right to Information Amendment Bill, the government seeks to amend sections 16 and 27 of the RTI Act, which equates the status of the CICs, the Central Information Commissioners, with that of the Election Commissioners, and the State Information Commissioners with the Chief Secretaries of their states, so they can function in an independent and effective manner. The dismantling of this architecture empowers the central government to unilaterally decide the tenure, salary, allowances, and other terms of service of the Information Commissioners, both at the centre and the states. Introducing the bill, and just now my good friend, the Honourable Minister of State, Jitendra Singh Ji, asserted that this is a minor and routine amendment, prompted by the anomaly that Information Commissioners are making decisions that can be challenged in the High Courts, so how can they have the same status as Supreme Court judges? This is fallacious logic, Mr. Speaker. You and I can challenge the decisions of the President of India, the Prime Minister of India in the High Courts today. Does that reduce those dignitaries below the level of High Court judges? Yes. I'm sorry to say that this seemingly innocuous intent simply does not wash. In fact, I worry that far from being a simple technical change, this RTI amendment is a deliberate attempt to weaken the RTI framework and to undermine the RTI altogether. My suspicions are aroused, Mr. Speaker, because in the last 5 years, this government has hollowed out the effectiveness of the RTI by leaving so many positions of state and information commissioners and staff vacant that RTI applications are inordinately delayed, with the backlog mounting daily. Since 2014, no appointments to the CIC have been made unless the matter was agitated in the courts. In 2018, sir, last year, the CIC had to function with just 3 out of 11 commissioners. 3. Until the Supreme Court passed such severe strictures that the government was forced to make some more appointments. But despite that, today, currently 4 posts of information commissioners are still lying vacant in the CIC. Meanwhile, nearly 32,000 RTI cases are pending, of which more than 9,000 are pending for more than 1 year. This amendment is therefore, if anything, part of a pattern of a sustained effort by this government to render the RTI, like the Human Rights Commission, a toothless tiger. Now, the basic truth, Mr. Speaker, is that RTI has resulted in a fundamental shift. That's what's made the government uncomfortable. It empowers the citizens' access to power and decision-making. That's why 60 lakh Indian citizens have availed of the right to obtain information from the government at local, state and central levels. Obviously, this makes RTI a challenge to vested interests at all levels of government because it threatens arbitrariness, misuse of privilege and corruption. They have obtained information from such diverse institutions of governance as the village ration shop, the Reserve Bank of India and the Prime Minister's office. They have raised questions of the Defence Ministry, on demonetization, on electoral bonds, on unemployment figures, and even on the appointment of the election commissioners and the non-appointment of the Lokpal. This wide-ranging information related to decision-making has actually, for the most part, been given to them, despite some serious resistance by officials in government, because of the independence and high status of the Information Commission. This is what the government is trying to amend. What is at stake here? How important is the seemingly routine matter? Using RTI has not been devoid of risk, Mr. Speaker. More than 80 RTI users have been murdered because of their courage and their determination to persist in using the RTI to challenge officials who wish to keep certain matters secret. It is widely accepted around the world that one of the most important structural elements of any independent oversight institution, such as in our case the CBC, the Election Commission, the Lokpal, the CIC, is a basic guarantee of tenure and a fixed salary. There is a strong nexus between the independence of an institution and the fixity of tenure and stable income of those who are appointed to it. The Supreme Court of India agrees, sir. In Union of India versus R. Gandhi, President Madras Bar Association, the Supreme Court has recognized fixed tenures and stable salaries as essential aspects of institutional independence. Now, under the Act, the Information Commissioners are appointed for 5 years, subject to an age limit of 65. It was on the recommendation of the Parliamentary Standing Committee that the Information Commissioners and the CIC were made on a par with the Election Commissioners and the CEC respectively for tenure and emoluments. All this will now go through this amendment. The government can hire and fire the Information Commissioners as they like, pay them what they choose, and this will inevitably vitiate the independence of the Information Commissioners. That is why, Mr. Speaker, when the bill was sought to be introduced, I warned this House that it was not just an RTI amendment bill, but an RTI elimination bill. Now, the Minister claims that a statutory body cannot enjoy the same salary as a constitutional body. Not true, sir. For instance, this government notified the Tribunal, Appellate Tribunal and other authorities' rules of 2017. As per these rules, the chairpersons of tribunals get a salary of 2.5 lakhs. Whereas the salary of a Supreme Court judge, as per Section 12A of the Supreme Court Judges Act 1958, is also 2.5 lakhs. So this government itself has equated the salaries of a statutory body with that of a constitutional body. So why not continue for the CIC? There is another problem, Mr. Speaker. Apart from Section 13, which deals with the terms and conditions for the Central Information Commission, in amending Section 16, the central government will also control, through rules, the terms and conditions of appointment of information commissioners in the states. This is an assault on the basic structure of federalism. I'm sure my colleagues in the DMK will have a few words to say about this. The government says it is committed to cooperative federalism, but it rides roughshods over the rights of the states when it sees its own self-interest at stake. The irony, sir, is that the RTI Act was only passed in 2005 after thorough examination by a parliamentary standing committee. So thorough that the law was passed unanimously in both houses. Contrary to the claim of my good friend, the Honourable Minister, that the RTI Act was clumsily, hastily drafted, the issue of the status to be accorded to information commissioners in order to insulate them from government pressure was extensively discussed during the formulation of the law before it was unanimously passed. The Standing Committee affirmed explicitly in its third report, sir, and I quote, its determination to ensure that it functions with the utmost independence and autonomy, hence this status. And now you are seeking to amend it when you have not even constituted the parliamentary standing committees. So there can be no scrutiny of the need for this amendment and its implications. This is not minimum government, maximum governance, sir. It's opposite. It is also political cynicism of the highest order. So the manner in which the amendments are being pushed through, without any public consultation, either by a standing committee or with interested citizens, demonstrates this government's desperation to pass the amendments without even proper parliamentary scrutiny. According to the mandatory pre-legislative consultative policy of the government enshrined in 2014, draft bills are to be publicized by the government and public calls for comments have to be issued. Previous governments of both the UPA and the NDA put on the website proposed amendments to the RTI rules for further deliberations by the public. But this bill was brought to the Lok Sabha without any public debate on its contents. The text of the bill was publicly known only on July 18th, a day prior to its introduction, when it was circulated to us, the Lok Sabha MPs. Similarly, under Section 4(1)(c) of the RTI Act, public authorities are expected to release relevant material to the public regarding any change in the RTI. This rule was not followed by the government in the formulation of the bill, and therefore the government's action violates the RTI Act itself, sir. Now, the government's unseemly haste to rush pending legislation through even before a parliamentary standing committee has been constituted itself rings a warning bell. Why does the government not want detailed clause-by-clause deliberations on the bill? Why does it not want a chance for citizens to present their views on it? Are they afraid their true intentions will be exposed in the process? And there is finally, sir, a very serious matter I am constrained to bring to your attention, Mr. Speaker. Nothing less than a serious charge of contempt of Parliament. The Honourable Minister's own department, the DOPT, issued a notification on 26 July 2018 calling for applicants to fill up the vacancies in the CIC. However, unlike its earlier advertisements, it failed to mention the tenure of 5 years and stated that the salary will be as determined on the date of joining, even though the law, as of date, prescribes a fixed salary. This notification, in other words, Mr. Speaker, assumes that Parliament will enact this bill without change. Further, in an affidavit to the Supreme Court, the central government said it has not filled up the vacancies in the CIC because the bill amending the RTI is pending in Parliament. This reveals the government's blithe assumption that Parliament will act as a rubber stamp to approve the text of any bill it brings to the House. This is not democracy, sir. This is a brute majority that is speaking here, disdaining the constitutional provisions that constitute Parliament's authority and essentially saying they will ignore any deliberations in the House is, in fact, sir, a sign of contempt of Parliament. I am not moving a contempt notice, Mr. Speaker, but I hope you will yourself give severe strictures to the government for this cavalier disregard of Parliament's rights. So why this desperation to violate every canon, every precedent, every convention and rush through this bill? What has provoked this unnecessary amendment, Mr. Speaker? Was this because the CIC issued orders regarding the disclosure of the Prime Minister's educational qualifications? Was it because in the recent general elections, the RTI helped with the cross-verification of the affidavits of powerful electoral candidates with official documents? Was it because certain information commissioners have ruled in favour of disclosure of information that certain powerful officials would have preferred not to disclose? We will never know, but civil society organizations and RTI activists are openly raising such questions and expressing such concerns. In conclusion, Mr. Speaker, let me say that independent structures to regulate and monitor the government, to keep its power in check, are vital to a democratic state committed to freedom and justice. When power is centralized and exercised at the whims of those in power, freedom is threatened and our democracy is in peril. This is why we cannot see these amendments as a routine matter, but as a very serious one. They constitute a deliberate architectural change to roll back the gains of the RTI, restrict its independence, and regressively enforce power equations. The Commission, which under the law of 2005 had status, independence and authority, will now function like a department of the central government and be subject to the same hierarchy as the government departments and same demands for obedience of the Prime Minister's office. I urge the government not to assume they will be in power forever. One day they will find themselves on this side of the House, and they will regret that they have destroyed the autonomy and independence of the RTI. This amendment bill violates the constitutional principles of freedom, of federalism, undermines the independence of the Information Commissioners, and severely dilutes the provisions of the RTI Act 2005. Given that there has been no public consultation on it, the RTI Amendment Bill should be withdrawn and referred to a Parliamentary Standing Committee, and the committee should be constituted without further delay. My party, Mr. Speaker, cannot support such a regressive and dangerous piece of legislation in its present form and in the hasty manner in which it is sought to be pushed through. The Honourable Minister is a decent man. I would urge him not to make such a grave mistake that is completely unworthy of him. For all our sakes, before it is too late, please withdraw this bill. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.